Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about Apartheid is a Crime, Portraits of the Israeli Occupation by Mats Svensson. He's a Swedish journalist, and this book is just as much photos as it is text and quotes. And as limited as my technological means are, I'm going to try to show you some pictures as I read some of the quotes from Mats, who lived in Gaza. And this is actually one of the newer books I've reviewed on the channel. This was published in 2020. A lot of the books that I've been reading published earlier, some in 2006, some before that time period. So this one I feel is quite current. 2020 wasn't that long ago. And I'll start by giving you Matt's, let's say, reasoning, thinking for why he wanted to put this book together. Palestinian news stories are often disconnected, disjointed news items with seemingly no relation to other news. They are all marred by negative connotations. In this narrative, the lives of a farmer, a prisoner, and a refugee barely overlap. Due to this deliberate disconnect, Palestine becomes pieces, ideas, notions, perceptions, but nothing complete or never whole. A narrative that is centered on the stories reflecting history, reality, and aspirations of ordinary people will allow for a genuine understanding of the real dynamics that drive the conflict. These stories that define whole generations of Palestinians are powerful enough to challenge the ongoing partiality and polarization. The fact is that Palestinians are neither potential martyrs nor potential terrorists. They are people who are being denied basic human rights, who have been dispossessed from their lands, and are grievously mistreated. They have resisted for nearly 7 decades and will continue to resist until they acquire their fundamental human rights. This is the core of the Palestinian narrative, yet it is the least told story. A true understanding of it would require a greater exposure of the extraordinary collective narrative of the, quote, ordinary people. And here he tells one bite of a story, which he then talks about in a later chapter in detail. It was morning and I was on my way to work. Settlers had taken over a house and forcibly removed the old couple living there, just a few hundred meters from the consulate. The man who was ill eventually passed away. The woman erected a tent near her old house. It was torn down over and over again. It happened just outside the consulate. We never knew how to act. It was as if there was a secret language. Here in this crazy city, diplomats could not call a thief, a murderer, colonialism, apartheid. The only thing that mattered was silent diplomacy, so silent that no one heard it. So now I'll read some quotes. He has certain photos and then he has quotes interspersed. And I don't have time to read all of them. Again, this is a review. This is to get you interested in the book potentially and for you to buy it. And as always, there'll be a link to the book in the description. This is from Moshe Dayan, a former defense minister of Israel. What can we say against their terrible hatred of us? For years now, they have sat in the refugee camps of Gaza, having watched how, before their very eyes, we have turned their land and villages, where they and their forefathers previously dwelled, into our home. This is from Ali Jarbawi, former official of the Palestinian National Authority, which we'll hear from Jarbawi over and over, actually. Over the years, Israel has used all forms of pressure to prevent the Palestinians from achieving their national rights and gaining independence. It hasn't been enough for Israelis to believe their own claims about Palestinians. They have sought incessantly to impose this narrative on the world and to have it adopted by their Western allies. Here's what I find a devastating picture. Those of you who are familiar, this is the wall that snakes through the West Bank, and there's a young Palestinian boy just taking care of his animals. But this wall section was eventually filled up. So we're seeing this in progress. But I mean, imagine living in those conditions. And remember, the occupation is supposed to be temporary, and Israel's a democracy, because we know we know that democracies act this way all around the world. This was very, very poignant as a picture. So someone's house had just been demolished, but you have to realize children are still going to be children. They don't necessarily have the context to understand how tragic the events are that are going on around them. And so they just act as children sometimes. And so you'll see here are some children sliding down the roof of a demolished house or just playing on it, right? That, a few moments ago, this was somebody's home, and children being children, they just see a place where they can play, and they do so, and they've got smiles on their faces. Remember, these are humans. Some Israelis would not let you believe that, but they are. Here's a young boy living. That's his home, right? Everything's been demolished, so you just have some canvas and some tenting as your roof. And look at that smile. What a sweet kid. And just showing you that the Palestinian spirit is indomitable. They will not be beaten. They will not be destroyed. They are going to persevere. And they're an example to all of us. So here you can see, when you look at this, you have to realize all of that used to be homes. It was just cleared because the Israelis would see it as a security threat or for whatever reason. You can see for yourself, imagine people living there, all gone. To say, I wish I could talk about more that's going on in the book, but I have to get through all of it. There's just too much to share, so I'm just picking certain bits and pieces. This is from Dr. Mark H. Ellis, University Professor of Jewish Studies, Professor of History, and Director of the Center for Jewish Studies at Baylor University. What we as Jews have done to the Palestinian people is wrong. What we as Jews are doing to the Palestinian people today is wrong. With that confession, we agree to begin to walk the path with Palestinians towards justice and equality. As that path begins to be walked, the memories of each people broken by history remain. But as that path is walked, new memories begin to be created. As those memories of justice and equality are created, they begin to dominate the history of both peoples until in the end, an injury against one is an injury against all. I mean, it's a very optimistic take, but I appreciate that from Dr. Ellis because it has the same hope that I do, which is that there will be peace one day. This is from Amin Nasser, who wrote a poem for Nakba Day in 2008, and there were a bunch of balloon releases, black balloon releases with notes. He wrote, "You stole my house, my grandfather's and my grandmother's beach, but you will never steal my history and my memory. You tore me away from my land, but my land transformed inside me to a country. My memory is my country, my story is my country, the catastrophe of my people is my country. My country will remain inside me and will bring me back to the land anew. As for myself, my story and my grandmother's story and my memory will continue to pull my roots deeper into the heart of my land." This is from President Barack Obama. "The Palestinian people's right to self-determination and justice must be recognized. Put yourself in their shoes. Look at the world through their eyes. It is not fair that a Palestinian child cannot grow up in a state of her own and lives with the presence of a foreign army that controls the movements of her parents every single day. It is not just when settler violence against Palestinians goes unpunished." And keep in mind, the next quote I'm going to read is from George Bush. And you have to realize when you have George Bush and Barack Obama agreeing on something, people should sort of wake up that there might be something going on here. George W. Bush, "There should be an end to the occupation that began in 1967. An agreement must establish Palestine as a homeland for the Palestinian people, just as Israel is a homeland for the Jewish people." It's from Roger Waters. "After more than 2 decades of negotiations, the vulnerable Palestinian population still lives under occupation, while more land is taken, more illegal settlements are built, and more Palestinians are imprisoned, injured, or killed, struggling for the right to live in dignity and peace, to raise their families, to till their land, to aspire to each and every human goal, just like the rest of us." This again is from Ali Jarbawi, who we heard from earlier. "If the occupied population chooses to stand in the way of the occupier's goals, then they are demonized, which allows the occupier the supposed moral excuse of confronting them with all possible means, no matter how harsh. Imagine being punished for resisting an occupier." This is from Gideon Levy, who I've done a review for on the channel already. If I were a teacher, I would tell my students that the Israeli Defense Forces are not a moral army and why it could never be one. I would tell them it's an occupation army and that the occupation is criminal. From Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who some of you may know is former Assistant Secretary to the Treasury, and he associate editor of the Wall Street Journal. The obstacle to peace is the United States government, which has consistently opposed the entire world's decades-long effort to stop the Zionist genocide of a land called Palestine. From Desmond Tutu, those who turn a blind eye to injustice actually perpetuate injustice. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. It doesn't matter where we worship or live, we are members of one family, the human family, God's family. Another quote from Gideon Levy, "The problem is ordinary Israelis have little idea about what has been going on. Young people are the worst, more ignorant, more brainwashed. They have never met a Palestinian in their lives." Another quote from Ali Jarbawi, "Israel cannot continue to be the exception to the rule of international law and human rights. The international community must hold it accountable for its rhetoric and its actions and begin to treat it like all other countries." This is from Amira Haas, who's an Israeli journalist who I'll be reviewing one of her books later this year. And again, talking about apartheid. So this is a bit of a longer quote, but giving more context in relation to how is this apartheid precisely. An apartheid-like system is when we are talking about two peoples who live in the same territory between the sea and the river, the Mediterranean and the River of Jordan, two peoples. And there are two sets of laws which apply to each separate people. There are two. There are privileges and rights for the one people, for the Israeli people, and mostly for the Jews. And there are restrictions and decrees and military laws which apply to the other people, to the Palestinians. The Palestinians as a people are divided into subgroups, something which is reminiscent also of South Africa under apartheid rule. You have the Palestinians, the Israeli Palestinians who are citizens, but seventh-rate citizens. You have the Palestinians of Gaza, and you have the Palestinians of the West Bank, and now you have Palestinians in every different enclave. There are different restrictions and different decrees which apply to these different enclaves. And you have the Jerusalemites, East Jerusalemites. So all these subdivision of the other people, which disconnects them, which fragments them as a people. And then you have one government which is elected, which actually decides about the future of both peoples, the scope of development for both peoples, but it is being elected only by one people. For me, this is a form of apartheid, of demographic separation, which is meant to improve the conditions and the well-being and the future of one people on the account of the other. Again, Amir Haas is an Israeli journalist, but as usual, she will be accused of being an anti-Semite, self-loathing, etc., etc. Another quote from Desmond Tutu, "I have witnessed the systematic humiliation of the Palestinian men, women, and children by members of the IDF. Their humiliation is familiar to all Black South Africans who were corralled and harassed and insulted and assaulted by the security forces of the apartheid government." Philip Giraldi, former officer of the CIA and now the executive director of the Council for the National Interest. "Washington knows very well but will never acknowledge that phony peace talks provide cover for Israeli expansion on the ground that will make a Palestinian state impossible to achieve. Indeed, Israel could not possibly continue its settlement policy, which is opposed by nearly all the world without American tacit support." And that's something I, as an American citizen, have to accept, that I am complicit in this occupation as a citizen. Here, a home is being demolished, and you can see here's a fridge with some pictures of some lovely, cute children. You can see belongings out here. These are real people. This is not happening to animals. This is happening to fellow humans who have the same faces as us, the same expressions as us, the same aspirations as we do. From Aesop G. Pahad, who's a South African politician, "When South Africans visit Palestine, most are shocked at how much worse apartheid is there than that of the old South Africa, and they comment that it cannot be called anything other than apartheid." So I'm sure that now this South African politician will be called an anti-Semite, even though he experienced apartheid, knows what apartheid looks like, sees it in another place, calls it that, Remember that the Israeli government can never be criticized. It's the most moral government in the world. It's never made any mistakes, and it will never make any mistakes. And to criticize it is anti-Semitic. As long as you understand that, then you can engage in this discourse. So, recommend it strongly. Apartheid is a Crime by Matt Svensson. As always, if you like this video, please hit like, hit subscribe, share it with someone who you think will benefit from this. That's how the channel will grow. If you'd like to do more than that, please consider supporting me on Patreon. There's a link to that below, or you can hit the join button on YouTube. You get early access to videos, as well as the ability to nominate books for the future. Reminder, there's also my Amazon wish list if you'd like to pick a book from there. As a reminder, all of the proceeds this year, a portion of all of the proceeds from my Patreon, the YouTube channel, etc., are going to go to the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. So please consider supporting that cause directly yourself or by participating in any way in the channel, and then you'll be able to support indirectly. But I hope you consider supporting that cause. As always, enjoy your reading.